Come with us as we take our 2 dogs across 6 countries in 12 days. So the adventure starts on day 1. We make sure the dogs are ready for a long car journey, get everything packed up, and travel over to meet our friends who live about 30 minutes away. From here we take the route down from Hertfordshire to the Channel Tunnel. Our journey today is a couple of 100 miles from Hertfordshire down to Arras. If you've never taken your dogs abroad before, let me give you a quick overview of what's required. Before travelling, your dogs will need a rabies vaccination. You can't travel until 3 weeks after, and it's valid for 3 years. Then, up to 10 days before you leave, you need to get your animal health certificate from your vet. Finally, when you're abroad, you'll need to have a tapeworm treatment 1 to 5 days before returning back to the UK. This whole process will probably set you back about £325 per dog. When we got to the Channel Tunnel, we then checked the dogs in, they scan the microchips and review all the paperwork, and then we let them run around in the off-lead area just outside the dog check-in. This allowed them to burn off any energy and go to the toilet before we got on the train. From here we then drive towards the train and go through passport control. This is probably the slowest part of the journey, just because of the sheer number of people trying to get through. Because we had a roof box, we were on the single deck version of the train. The cost of the crossing will depend on the size of your vehicle, the amount of space you need with the roof box, and the time of travel. For us, we spent £118 on the outward journey at 11 AM and £128 on our return journey at 4 PM. Additionally, we paid £22 per dog per crossing. The whole thing took about 35 minutes, and before you know it, we're in France. We drive off the train and follow the signs to leave Calais. The first stop for us is to find some lunch. After a quick lunch stop, we're back in the cars and heading another 60 miles down to Arras. The plan was to break up our journey down to Italy over a couple of days, and this was our first stop. We stayed in the Mercure Hotel, which was pretty central into Arras, and cost about £100 per room per night. That didn't include breakfast. After checking in, we went for a little walk around the city. We arrived in mid-afternoon, so had plenty of time to spare. It was nice to get the dogs walking around and having some exercise after spending some time in the car. And after a bit of exploring, we stopped somewhere to have a drink and some food. It was then back to the hotel and ready for the next day. We woke up the next morning and had breakfast. Dogs are allowed in the restaurant. And I then ironed on some French flags to the dogs' holiday bandanas. Winston is looking the part. We go for a quick walk around town and then check out of the hotel. It's now time to start the second leg of our journey, travelling from Arras in the north of France and right down to the Swiss border, heading to Colmar. Today was quite a long travel day, covering about 300 miles. We hadn't planned any stops along the way. Driving abroad was pretty straightforward. We probably spent around £250 for the 1,700-mile journey, around £60 in tolls in France, £3 for the low emission fare, and £35 on the Swiss vignette. We stopped at some services and then hit the road again. Because we're taking this day at quite a slow pace, we actually arrived in Colmar just before it got dark. We checked into our accommodation and then took the dogs out for a walk. Colmar was a really quaint little town. As you got to the centre, the architecture really changed and was quite beautiful. I definitely want to go back and explore. But like with Arras, we were only here for 1 night. On day 3 we wake up and we get ready to check out of our accommodation. We were staying about a 20-minute walk out of town in an accommodation called Le Big Mama. We found this place through booking.com and it cost £280 a night, but it was suitable for multiple adults. We had 4 adults and 2 children. Because it was a Saturday, a market had been opened just outside where we were staying, and we enjoyed this as we walked through back into town. We let our friends' children walk the dogs, and then we head to get some breakfast, a coffee and some croissants. After that, we then hit the road, and it wasn't long before we were driving through Switzerland. Again, we had another long route today, about 300 miles, driving past Basel, Zurich, Kerr, and eventually down into Italy via Lake Como. Driving in Switzerland was much more fun. The landscape was a lot more mountainous as we hit the Alps, the service stations were beautiful, and the Splugen Pass route we took was about 7,000 foot up and even saw some snow on our way. It was quite a twisty route, so not for the faint-hearted, but after a couple of hours we found ourselves in Italy and the sun was shining. We head to the supermarket, which meant getting to our villa, we could have a barbecue that evening. In Lake Como we stayed in Dongo, in a villa with 4 bedrooms. It cost us £800 for 4 nights. The plan today was quite straightforward. We wanted just to enjoy the villa and then go for a little walk around the lake, taking it easy after a couple of days travelling. But I'm going to shut up for 5 minutes so we can enjoy the views. After all that walking, we decided to treat ourselves to some lunch and an Aperol Spritz. It was a theme across this holiday. And back to the villa to chill out, read some books, do some sunbathing, and enjoy our time. On day 5, the weather had changed slightly. It was quite cloudy and overcast, and I started the morning by taking Buddy out for a walk. I found this route marked out nearby, which allowed us to climb up some hills overlooking Dongo. Buddy, being a Bernese mountain dog, was a much better climber than I was, and left me very much behind. We got a good height, not all the way to the top, and decided that was enough, and it was time to turn back and find everyone else. He was also quicker at going down than I was. We then decided to leave the dogs in the villa and chill out, and the adults headed over via ferry from Menagio to Bellagio. This cost around £8 per person, and took about 20 minutes to make the crossing. It also ran frequently, about every half an hour. Bellagio was quite busy, but it is one of the main touristy towns on Lake Como. We easily found a place to have some lunch and have a look around, but unfortunately the weather started to change and it did begin to rain. So we put on our rain jackets and head back across the ferry to Menagio. From there, it was back to the villa to chill out with the dogs. On our last full day in Italy, it was time to do one of our favourite activities, which was rent a boat. But because the sun was shining and it was a really hot day, we decided not to take the dogs with us because it wouldn't really be fair. Instead, we got up early and took them out for a nice long walk around Dongo and the lake. And once they're ready to chill, we head down to Newton Rent-A-Boat to hire a boat. None of us have a skipper's license, and that's okay. It cost us about £200 to hire this boat for 2 hours. And considering you didn't need the license, it was ample fast enough. We managed to get down to the top of the lake, almost to the Bellagio, and back in the 2 hours. And despite being May, one of our friends was brave enough to take a dip in the lake. This option is dog-friendly, so if it is appropriate, you could take your dog out with you. It's just an amazing way to spend the day. After the boat, we got some lunch and then head back to the villa for some more chill-out time with the dogs. Winston is a total sun seeker, and Buddy likes the attention. That evening, I decided to take Buddy out for a swim, a last swim in Lake Como before we then move on to the next part of our holiday. I'm not sure if it's normal for Bernese mountain dogs to like swimming, but he is an amazing swimmer, and at one point I was worried he wasn't going to come back in. We head back to the villa and then chilled out for the rest of the day. On day 7, we start by packing up the cars and getting ready to leave. Checkout time was at 10, and we were ready to go about 9, so had some breakfast nearby. Our route took us around the west coast of the lake, past Lugano, past Lucerne, and then into Interlaken. Border crossings on the continent is pretty straightforward. You drive through at a slow pace and only stop if you're asked to. It wasn't long before the Italian lakes turned into Swiss mountains, and despite a couple of service stops, we were making excellent progress. Plus the scenery was to die for. Have a look. Just outside Interlaken, we checked into our accommodation and then took the dogs out for a drink and had some food and dinner ourselves. It was then in time to put the Swiss flags on the dogs' bandanas, which we've been keeping up to date as we've gone along. On day 8, the sun was shining. Well, at least I thought it was, and then I head outside and it was awful. Unfortunately, this was very much the weather vibe for the entire time we stayed in Switzerland. Undeterred, we jumped in the car and travelled 25 minutes from our accommodation in Interlaken down to Lauterbrunnen. Known as the Valley of 72 Waterfalls, and also the place that inspired Tolkien to write Lord of the Rings, this place has some of the most breathtaking scenery I've ever seen in my life. It was pretty busy with tourists, but that is understandable. But despite this, parking wasn't an issue. We jumped out the car and went for a walk, heading out of the village. Given the fact that Buddy is a Bernese mountain dog and we were now in the Bernese Oberland, I thought he would be the celebrity, but actually it turns out that Winston was far more popular with some of the tourists. Must be that cute face. There was the option to go for a walk behind one of the waterfalls, but I'll be perfectly honest with you, I don't think it was worth the wait. Given the fact it was getting quite hilly, Winston was getting tired, so we had put him in the backpack. From here we travelled about 10 minutes by car to Steckelberg to get in a cable car, and head up the mountain to Murin via Grimmelwald. These cable cars ran about every half an hour and were massive. There was 100 people in ours, so it was a tight squeeze, but luckily Buddy got to sit in the driver's space. The whole journey took about 15 minutes, and before you know it, you're in Murin. Some of the views up here were spectacular, but given the fact it was lunchtime, we made sure we had some lunch and got to try some local cuisine. We then went for another walk after lunch, and I put on Winston's Bernese outfit. It was to make him blend in and look like a local. What do you think? No matter where you look, the views were amazing, and I could have found myself walking around here for hours. I'm not sure Winston could though. Given the fact we were travelling with 2 friends and their kids, we wanted to go to one of the play parks a bit higher up the mountain. We got in one of the funiculars and travelled upwards, this costing about 24 Swiss francs in total. We got a couple of pictures on the hillside, Buddy and Winston both looking like supermodels, and then head back down. Winston was exceptionally tired by this point, and I can't blame him. There's lots of sports to do in Lauterbrunnen. You can hire bikes, go paragliding, but that wasn't for us, at least not on this trip. We carried on back down the mountain, waiting patiently for the cable car to arrive before we all then squeezed on, and enjoying the views on the way down, even if it was a bit grey and raining. Finally back at Steckelberg, we get in the car and head to the supermarket to get some dinner. Enjoying the views as we take the lovely drive back home. Day 9 started with the vet visit. As mentioned previously, you need to have that tapeworm treatment 1 to 5 days before returning back to the UK. We found this vet's Tierklinik online, and the whole thing was really easy and straightforward. Ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch, but their English was outstanding, which made the whole thing much easier. After the vet's visit, we had some breakfast, and then decided to jump in the car and head to Grindelwald. Unfortunately, in Grindelwald, the weather was just so shocking. It was raining really hard, and because it was a bit higher up in the mountains, it was quite cold, about 6 degrees. So we went for a very short walk and went to some tourist shops to find some stuff, including some souvenirs with Buddy's face on. After that, we got back in the car, went for some lunch, and then head back to the house for the afternoon to play some games and chill out. Everything in Switzerland is just more expensive. The accommodation cost us almost £1,600 for 3 nights for a 4-bedroom house. Later that evening, we head back into Interlaken city to have a little walk around and find somewhere to have some dinner. It was still raining, unfortunately, so not much more to see here. Given the fact the weather was so shocking the day before, we decided to do something a bit spontaneous and fun to improve the holiday. As such, because we're going so close to Germany, we thought, why not have lunch there as well? So on our drive from Switzerland to France, we head via Germany into Freiburg. And as mentioned, here we are going through one of the German border crossings. This was the only time the entire holiday where they wanted us to stop. After a couple of hours drive, we were in Freiburg, and there was something quite funny about seeing this really old clock tower with a McDonald's underneath it. If by chance anyone from Freiburg ever watches this, I would love to know a bit more about why you have these open waterways in your town. They're quite cute, Buddy enjoyed them, and they were good for washing his feet and having a drink on the go. We found a nice pizza restaurant nearby, which was dog-friendly. In fact, that's one thing I can say about the continent. Every single place we went to for lunch or dinner was in fact dog-friendly. I'm not sure what the rules are. I know in the UK you can't have your dogs in places where you prepare food. I don't think that felt like the case on the continent. After lunch, we got back in the car because we had another 150 miles to cover from Freiburg, staying just north of Metz, back in France. Both dogs being an absolute dream with all the travelling. This accommodation was located in quite a quiet suburbs, but was perfect for what we needed to unwind towards the end of the holiday. It was a beautiful penthouse apartment on the 3rd floor of a building and cost around £300 for the night for the 3 bedrooms. After some food, we took the dogs out for a walk and then played some games to enjoy the rest of the evening. On day 11, we start our journey with a short drive heading into Luxembourg. Much like with Germany, we weren't staying here, but wanted to visit, and had seen online the night before that Winston Castle, right on the German border, was worth a look. Whilst we didn't go in, we did stay to enjoy the views, and then head down into the small village to go and grab a coffee. It was also just nice to break up the driving with an activity like this. After an hour or so, we made sure the dogs had some water before getting back in the car and heading northwest out of Luxembourg and into Belgium. The dogs were just exhausted. Every time we got in the car, they just fell straight asleep. Our last destination was Bruges, and we found a car park just by the train station, which is about a 20-minute walk outside of the city. We arrived mid-afternoon, which was just in time for some sightseeing, and then find a nice space to have some food. It was pretty busy with tourists and also busy with people with dogs. Whilst the dogs have been great, Buddy does get a little bit restless, and the restaurant we found, whilst nice, did have these lovely infrared heaters which kept us warm, but him a bit too warm. So I quickly ate my food and took him out for a walk whilst the others ate their meals. It also gave us a chance to go on a little photo shoot around Bruges. And given the fact that Buddy is a model and recently did a job for ASOS, it's never too bad to update their portfolio. After dinner, we then take the leisurely walk back to the car and head out of town for about 10 minutes to our final stay. Here we were staying in the Ibis budget just outside Bruges. It was cheap and cheerful, but just what we needed for the last night of our holiday. It was around £100 per room per night. Finally, it's day 12 and the last day of the holiday. We woke up, we checked out the hotel, and went back to the same car park as we did before. We wanted to do a bit more sightseeing before getting some lunch and then heading over to Calais to get the return journey home. Bruges was quite touristy. We often saw big tourist groups heading around or got stuck behind walking tours, but as we were tourists ourselves, I really can't complain. We got a coffee, and because the boys were being so well behaved, stopped by the ice cream shop to get an ice cream. They even had some of their own too. By now those holiday bandanas were full of flags, and speaking of flags, Winnie was starting to flag given the amount of walking he was doing. He was back in the backpack, and we even put the GoPro just behind his head so we could get a pug's point of view walking around Bruges. And that's it. That's the holiday. From here we head back to the cars and head back to Calais to get the train home. Thank you so much for watching. If you don't already, please subscribe to our channel. It would mean the world. And why not take a look at some of our other videos? There's plenty of dog-friendly holidays around the UK, including one of our most recent trips to Scotland. Finally, I'd love to know, would you take your dogs abroad? And if you have already, where would you advise we go next?